The metal walls of Harmony Point Station hummed softly with the sound of air recyclers and power generators. In the diplomatic meeting room, two very different beings sat across from each other at a curved table made of polished star metal. Commander Vextal shifted his massive frame in the specially reinforced chair. His chitinous armor, dark blue-black like deep ocean water, bore the scars of countless battles. Plasma burns had left silvery marks across his chest plate. Kinetic weapon impacts had chipped his shoulder guards. A particularly nasty energy blade wound ran from his left temple down to his jaw, barely missing his compound eye. The Krillian warrior was proud of these marks. Each scar told a story of victory, of enemies defeated, of worlds conquered in the name of the Krillian Empire. His people were known throughout the galaxy as the finest warriors ever to walk on multiple legs. They had crushed 17 different species in the last century alone. Their military might was unquestioned, their tactical superiority absolute. Across from him sat a small, soft creature that barely reached his lowest shoulder when standing. The human female had introduced herself as Kim Ji-won, Earth's diplomatic representative to the Outer Rim Trading Council. Her skin was pale pink, almost translucent compared to his armored hide. She had no natural weapons, no claws, no venom sacs, no energy projection organs. Her clothing was simple fabric that would not stop even the weakest plasma pulse. Vextal found humans fascinating in their weakness. These creatures had only recently developed faster-than-light travel. Their ships were crude, their weapons primitive, their armor laughably thin. Yet here they were, trying to establish trade agreements with species that had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. "Your species interests me." "Kim Ji-won," Vextal said, his voice rumbling through his translator device. The human language was so simple, with only one mouth making sounds instead of the proper harmony of his people's 4 vocal chambers. "You have achieved spaceflight, but your people seem so fragile." Kim Ji-won smiled, a strange expression that showed her small, flat teeth. "We may look fragile, Commander, but appearances can be deceiving. We've survived quite a lot on Earth." Vextal's mandibles clicked in amusement. What could these soft creatures have possibly survived? Their homeworld had no indication of serious predator species. Their gravity was comfortable, their atmosphere pleasant, their stars stable. It was practically a garden world. "I do not doubt your people have faced challenges," he said politely, "but surely nothing compared to true military conflict. My people have conquered the Theta sector. In our last campaign alone, we eliminated 2.3 million enemy combatants. The hegemony of Vorth learned why one does not challenge Krillian superiority. He expected the human to be impressed, perhaps frightened. Most species reacted with either awe or terror when he spoke of Krillian military achievements. The numbers alone usually made smaller species reconsider any hostile intentions. Instead, Kim Ji-won nodded thoughtfully and took a sip from her beverage container. "That is quite impressive, Commander. Large-scale conflicts are terrible things. We had a war on Earth called World War II where approximately 70 million people died over 6 years. Vextal's compound eyes focused more intently on the human. 70 million? That was impossible. The translator must have made an error. Perhaps she meant 70,000, which would still be remarkable for a single world conflict. "I believe there may be a translation error," he said carefully. "Did you say 70 million? "Yes, that's correct. 70 million casualties, possibly more. The exact numbers are difficult to verify because of the scale and destruction involved." The Krillian commander's bioluminescent patches began to flicker slightly. This was either a massive exaggeration or a serious misunderstanding of numbers. No single world could support a conflict that size. The logistics alone would be impossible. "This World War II," he said slowly. "This was a conflict between your world and another world? Another species?" Kim Ji-won shook her head. "No, Commander. This was humans fighting other humans. It involved most of our planet, but it was entirely an Earth-based conflict. We hadn't developed space travel yet." Vextal's chair creaked as he leaned forward. "Humans fighting humans? On a single world? With 70 million casualties?" The numbers made no sense. His own species had never lost more than a few 100,000 in any single campaign, and they fought across multiple star systems with advanced weapons. "I do not understand," he admitted. "How could a single world sustain such losses? What was this war fought over? Territorial control, political ideologies, resources, and ultimately survival." Kim Ji-won explained. It was fought on every continent except Antarctica. Multiple human nations formed alliances and fought using everything from traditional infantry to advanced aircraft, tanks, ships, and eventually nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons. Vextal's patches flickered more rapidly. Those were planet killers, weapons of absolute last resort. Most civilized species had banned their development entirely. The few races that possessed them kept them as deterrents, never to be actually used. You used nuclear weapons? On your own world? Yes. The United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan to end the war. The cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed completely. Each bomb killed over 100,000 people instantly. The Krillian warrior sat back in his chair, his mind struggling to process this information. These soft, weak-looking creatures had not only developed weapons of mass destruction, but had actually used them. On their own kind, on their own planet, this seems... He paused, searching for words. This seems extreme for a species that appears so peaceful. Kim Ji-won's expression grew serious. Humans are capable of great gentleness and great violence, Commander. We prefer peace, but we have learned to fight when necessary. World War II was necessary to stop regimes that threatened to enslave or exterminate entire populations. And this war, it lasted 6 years? 6 years of total global conflict, yes, but that was just one war. Human history has many such conflicts, though few as large in scale. Vextal's mind raced. Many such conflicts? He had assumed this World War II was some sort of historical anomaly, perhaps the result of unusual circumstances. But the human was suggesting it was merely the largest of many wars. How many wars has your species fought? He asked. Kim Ji-won paused, considering. Commander, that's like asking how many stars are in the sky. We've been fighting wars since before recorded history. Major conflicts, minor conflicts, civil wars, revolutions, territorial disputes. It would take days just to list the significant ones. But your species is unified now, yes? You have a single government? Not exactly. We have nearly 200 independent nations on Earth. We've formed various alliances and international organizations, but we're still politically divided. We've just learned to resolve most disputes through diplomacy rather than warfare. Vextal felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. These humans were not unified. They were still divided into competing groups, still potentially hostile to each other, and yet they had achieved space travel and were expanding into the galaxy. What would happen when they encountered other species they genuinely considered enemies? His people had always assumed that only unified species could achieve interstellar travel. The logistics and cooperation required seemed to demand it. Yet here were the humans, carrying their divisions and their capacity for massive warfare into space. Commander, Kim Ji-won said gently, noticing his distress, I hope I haven't alarmed you. Humans prefer peaceful solutions to problems. We're here to establish trade and friendship with other species. But Vextal was thinking of the implications. If humans could inflict 70 million casualties on themselves in a single war, what could they do to other species if they felt threatened? If they brought their apparent talent for total warfare to interstellar conflicts? For the first time in his military career, the battle-hardened Krillian commander felt something he had not experienced since he was a young soldier. Uncertainty about the enemy's capabilities. And these humans were not even enemies yet. The meeting continued, but Vextal found it difficult to concentrate on trade agreements and diplomatic protocols. His mind kept returning to those numbers. 70 million dead, nuclear weapons used, centuries of warfare, and still they expanded into space. What kind of species had the galaxy just welcomed? 3 hours later, Vextal found himself in the same meeting room, but now a third figure appeared in the holographic projector at the end of the table. The image showed another human male, this one older than Kim Ji-won, with gray streaks in his black hair and wearing what appeared to be a military-style uniform. Commander Vextal, I'd like you to meet Park Min-ho, Kim Ji-won said. He's a military historian from Earth's War College. I thought he might be able to answer your questions about World War II in more detail. Vextal's bioluminescent patches had finally stopped their nervous flickering, but he still felt deeply unsettled. He had spent the break between meetings trying to process what Kim Ji-won had told him, but the numbers simply did not compute with his understanding of warfare. Greetings. Commander, Park Min-ho said through the translator. Kim Ji-won tells me you're interested in learning about our global conflicts. I'm happy to share what I know. I'm having difficulty understanding the scale you described, Vextal said directly. 70 million casualties from a single world seems impossible. My people have fought across multiple star systems and never approached such numbers. Park Minho nodded seriously. I understand your confusion, Commander. The scale was unprecedented even by human standards. Let me put it in context for you. World War II wasn't fought like most conflicts. It was what we call total war. Total war? Every aspect of the participating nations was dedicated to the war effort. Entire economies were converted to produce weapons, vehicles, and supplies. Civilian populations became targets. Women and children worked in factories to build tanks and aircraft. Rationing systems controlled food distribution. Every citizen was part of the war effort, whether they wore a uniform or not. Vextal's mandibles clicked nervously. Your entire civilizations were mobilized? The major powers, yes. The United States had over 12 million people in military service at peak mobilization. The Soviet Union fielded over 30 million soldiers during the course of the war. Germany had over 18 million in their armed forces. These numbers don't include the civilians working to support them. The Krillian commander's compound eyes widened. Those numbers alone exceeded the entire population of many worlds he had conquered. How could your world support so many soldiers? Earth's population in 1940 was approximately 2.3 billion people, Park Minho explained. So we could field massive armies while still maintaining agricultural and industrial production. But it required unprecedented organization and sacrifice. The 2-3 billion? Vextal's voice came out as barely a whisper. His own homeworld had a population of roughly 800 million, and that was considered dense for a Krillian world. These humans had nearly 3 times that number on a single planet. The war was fought simultaneously on multiple continents, Park Minho continued, seemingly unaware of the aliens' growing distress. In Europe, we had the Eastern Front where Germany fought the Soviet Union. That front alone stretched over 2,000 kilometers and involved millions of soldiers in continuous combat for years. Vextal tried to imagine a battlefront stretching 2,000 kilometers. The largest engagement he had ever commanded covered perhaps 50 kilometers of territory and involved 30,000 troops. The logistics of supplying millions of soldiers across such distances seemed impossible. In the Pacific, Park Minho was saying, fighting occurred across thousands of islands spanning nearly half the planet. Naval battles involved hundreds of ships and aircraft. The Battle of Leyte Gulf alone involved over 300 vessels and lasted 4 days. 300 ships in a single battle? Vextal interrupted. That's correct. And it wasn't even the largest engagement in terms of personnel. The Battle of Stalingrad involved over 2 million soldiers from both sides. It lasted for months and resulted in over 1 million casualties. The numbers kept getting worse. Vextal had thought Kim Ji-won was perhaps exaggerating or misremembering, but this military historian was providing specific details that painted an even more terrifying picture. You mentioned nuclear weapons, Vextal said weakly. Park Minho's expression grew grim. Yes, the Manhattan Project. We developed atomic weapons in secret during the war. The technology went from theoretical physics to deployed weapons in under 4 years. When we tested the first bomb in New Mexico, some scientists weren't completely certain it wouldn't ignite the atmosphere. You tested a weapon that might have destroyed your world? The calculations showed it was extremely unlikely. But yes, there was a theoretical possibility. We tested it anyway because we believed the alternative, allowing the war to continue, would cost more lives. Vextal felt his exoskeleton growing cold. These creatures had risked their entire planet to end a single war. What level of desperation drove such decisions? The bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki weren't even our largest weapons, Park Minho continued. By the end of the war, we were developing much more powerful devices. The destruction was comprehensive. Entire city centers vaporized instantly. The heat was so intense it left shadows burned into concrete where people had been standing. Radiation poisoning killed survivors weeks later. Buildings melted. The bombs created their own weather patterns. Vextal's breathing became shallow. Weapons that created weather patterns, that left shadows of the dead burned into stone. His people's most powerful weapons could level buildings, but nothing approaching this scale of destruction. And this war, he said slowly, this was humans fighting humans. Yes, Commander. We had no alien enemies, no external threats. This was entirely internal to our species. Fascist regimes had risen to power and threatened to conquer or exterminate entire populations. Democratic nations allied to stop them. Your people nearly destroyed themselves? In many ways, yes. But we also learned from it. The war drove rapid technological advancement. We developed jet engines, ballistic missiles, early computers, advanced radar, antibiotics, blood transfusions, plastic surgery techniques. Many technologies that seemed impossible before the war became reality out of necessity. Park Min-ho paused and looked directly at Vextal through the hologram. Commander, I want you to understand something important. World War II was terrible beyond description, but it wasn't unique in human history for its brutality or innovation. It was unique for its scale and the fact that we documented it so thoroughly. There have been other such wars. Many others, though typically smaller in scope. The Mongol conquests in the 13th century killed an estimated 40 million people and created the largest land empire in history. The Napoleonic Wars reshaped Europe. The American Civil War introduced industrial-scale warfare. The Chinese Warring States period lasted for centuries. Each name meant nothing to Vextal, but the implications were clear. These humans had a long history of massive, innovative, destructive conflicts. World War II was not an aberration. It was simply their latest and largest expression of something fundamental to their nature. Why? He asked finally. Why do your people fight such terrible wars? Park Min-ho considered the question carefully. Because we believe some things are worth dying for, Commander. Freedom, justice, the protection of the innocent, the right to exist. When these values are threatened, humans will sacrifice everything to defend them. We don't see death in such conflicts as waste, we see it as necessity. Kim Ji-won, who had been quietly listening, added, We've learned to prefer peaceful solutions, Commander. But we've never forgotten the cost of failing to act when evil threatens good. Sometimes war is the only way to preserve what matters most. Vextal sat in stunned silence. His people fought for territory, for resources, for dominance, practical things with measurable value. But these humans fought for abstract concepts, ideas that couldn't be quantified or captured. They would die for principles. And if they would die for principles, what would they do to enemies who threatened those principles? For the first time in his military career, Commander Vextal began to understand that he might not be the apex predator he had always believed himself to be. The results were the same. A species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of conflict, that the next morning found Vextal in yet another meeting room. This one smaller and more private than the diplomatic chamber where he had first encountered Kim Ji-won. His research through the human databases had left him with more questions than answers, and despite his growing unease, he felt compelled to understand these creatures better. His new companion was another human male, older than the others he had met, with graying hair and weathered skin that spoke of long exposure to harsh conditions. Choi Dae-ho wore civilian clothes, but something in his bearing reminded Vextal of veteran soldiers he had known. Kim Ji-won suggested you might have some specific questions about human military philosophy, Choi Dae-ho said, settling into his chair with the careful movements of someone whose body had endured significant trauma. I spent 30 years in various human military forces before becoming a scholar. I've seen both the theory and practice of human warfare. Vextal's compound eyes focused intently on the human. I am trying to understand something that makes no logical sense to me. Your species fights wars over concepts that cannot be measured or captured. Why? Choi Dae-ho smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. That's the right question, Commander. Most species fight for resources, territory, food, minerals, breeding rights, concrete things with measurable value. Humans fight for those things too, but we also fight for ideas. Ideas cannot be possessed. No, but they can be destroyed. And that's often what we're really fighting against. The destruction of concepts we believe are essential to human existence. Vextal's bioluminescent patches flickered with confusion. Essential concepts? Freedom, justice, dignity, the right to exist as we choose. These aren't physical things, but they're as real to humans as territory is to your people, maybe more real. Because we can live without specific pieces of land, but we can't live as humans without these concepts. The Krillian commander struggled to understand this perspective. But surely survival is more important than abstract ideas. Is it? Choi Dae-ho leaned forward. Let me tell you about a battle I studied extensively, the defense of the Warsaw Ghetto in 1943. Jewish civilians, facing certain death from Nazi forces, chose to fight rather than submit to extermination. They had no hope of military victory. They had inadequate weapons, no training, no reinforcements coming. That sounds like suicide. It was in military terms, but they fought anyway for almost a month, because they decided that dying as fighters was preferable to dying as victims. They chose how their story would end, even though they couldn't prevent it from ending. Vexital's mandibles clicked nervously. Your people choose death over surrender? When the alternative is worse than death, yes. This isn't unusual in human military history. At the Battle of Thermopylae, 300 Spartans held a narrow pass against a Persian army of hundreds of thousands. They knew they would die, but their sacrifice bought time for other Greek cities to prepare defenses. These Spartans, they were compelled by their commanders? No, commander. They volunteered. Leonidas, their king, asked only for men who had sons to carry on their names, because he knew none of them would return home. The concept made Vexital's exoskeleton crawl with discomfort. Krillian military doctrine emphasized tactical withdrawal when facing overwhelming odds. Preserving forces for future battles was considered basic strategic sense. But these humans seemed to view certain deaths as more valuable than survival. You mentioned that humans fight differently than other species, Vexital said. How so? Choi Deho activated a holographic display showing tactical diagrams. Most galactic species fight what we call limited wars. They have specific achievable objectives. Capture this system, secure these resources, establish this territory. When the cost exceeds the benefit, they negotiate peace. This is rational military doctrine. Yes, it is. But humans also fight total wars. Conflicts where the objective isn't to gain something but to prevent the enemy from continuing to exist as a threat. In total war, compromise is impossible because the stakes are existential. The display showed a map of Earth during World War II. Nazi, Germany and Imperial Japan weren't fighting for territory or resources in the traditional sense. They were fighting to impose their vision of how human civilization should be organized. The Allies weren't fighting to conquer land. They were fighting to prevent humanity from being reorganized according to fascist principles. And this required 70 million deaths? The alternative, from the human perspective, was worse than 70 million deaths. It was the permanent subjugation or extermination of entire populations, the end of democratic government, the institutionalization of racial hierarchy, things that would have affected billions of people for generations. Vexital studied the tactical displays, trying to understand the strategic logic. So humans will accept enormous casualties to prevent ideological defeat? Not just accept them, embrace them when necessary. Let me tell you about kamikaze pilots. The human called up images of aircraft and ships. Near the end of World War II, Japanese pilots began flying suicide missions against American naval vessels. They would load their aircraft with explosives and crash directly into enemy ships, knowing it meant certain death. Military suicide missions? Thousands of them. The Japanese considered this honorable death in service of their emperor and their concept of national survival. The pilots wrote farewell letters to their families, performed traditional ceremonies, then flew to their deaths. Vexital felt his breathing become shallow. They chose to die? They chose to die effectively rather than live ineffectively. From their perspective, individual survival was less important than the survival of their ideals and their people. And the Americans who fought them, many American soldiers also accepted suicide missions when the situation demanded it. Throwing yourself on a grenade to save your squad, staying behind to hold a position while others escape, flying damaged aircraft into enemy positions rather than bailing out safely. Choi Deho's expression grew distant, as if remembering something painful. I knew a soldier who charged a machine gun nest alone because it was blocking our advance and people were dying. He knew he wouldn't survive, but he also knew his sacrifice would save dozens of others. He wasn't ordered to do it. He chose to do it. This is considered normal human behavior. Not normal, but not unusual either. We call it heroism, but it's really just an extreme expression of human values. The individual matters less than the group, and the group matters less than the principles the group represents. The Krillian commander sat in stunned silence for several minutes. His people fought bravely, but they fought to live and win. These humans fought to die effectively when living couldn't accomplish their goals. There is something else I must understand, Vexital said finally. All these wars you described in World War II, the ancient conflicts, the battles for abstract concepts, these were humans fighting other humans. That's correct. What happens when humans fight non-humans? When you encounter species you consider genuinely alien to your values? Choi Deho's expression grew very serious. Commander, that's a question we haven't had to answer yet. Every major war in human history has been against other humans who, despite our differences, shared basic human psychology and human limitations. You have never fought true aliens? Never. We've had no external threats that required military response. Our capacity for warfare developed entirely from internal conflicts. Vextal felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. So everything you have shown me, the total wars, the willingness to die for principles, the technological innovation driven by military necessity, all of this was humans fighting at less than their full potential? That's one way to look at it. We've never been truly threatened with extinction by an external enemy. We've never had to mobilize our entire species against something completely alien to human values. What do you think would happen if such a threat emerged? Choi Daeho was quiet for a long moment. I think, Commander, that any species threatening human survival would discover capabilities we don't even know we possess. History suggests that humans perform at their highest levels when facing existential threats. But surely your species would prefer diplomatic solutions. Of course. But if diplomacy failed, if an alien species proved hostile to human existence or human values, Choi Daeho met Vextal's compound eyes directly. I believe such a species would face the combined military potential of 2.3 billion humans united in a way we've never been united before. The number hit Vextal like a physical blow. 2.3 billion humans, all potentially mobilizable, all carrying the genetic and cultural legacy of thousands of years of warfare, all potentially facing their first truly external enemy. What would that look like? He asked weakly. I don't know, Commander. But based on human history, I suspect it would be unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen. Vextal left the meeting with his worldview completely shattered. He had always assumed that his species' military superiority came from their advanced technology and tactical expertise. Now he realized that true military strength might come from something much more fundamental. The willingness to sacrifice everything for principles that couldn't be measured or captured. And these humans... Vextal could not sleep. His species required only 4 hours of rest per rotation, but even that seemed impossible now. Every time he closed his compound eyes, he saw images of human cities burning under atomic fire, of battle lines stretching across continents, of 70 million dead from a single war. He had returned to his quarters aboard the Krillian diplomatic vessel docked at Harmony Point, but the familiar surroundings brought no comfort. The walls decorated with his military commendations now seemed small and insignificant. His collection of weapons from conquered enemies looked like children's toys compared to the weapons Park Min-ho had described. Instead of resting, he found himself in the station's central data hub at what humans called 3 in the morning. The facility operated continuously, serving beings from dozens of different species with varying rest cycles. A few other insomniacs worked at scattered terminals, but most of the vast chamber was empty. Vextal approached one of the public access terminals and began searching the human databases that had been made available for diplomatic purposes. He told himself he was conducting intelligence gathering, standard military procedure when encountering a new species. But the truth was simpler and more disturbing. He had to know if what the humans had told him was real. The first searches confirmed Park Min-ho's numbers. World War II, 60 to 70 million dead. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, over 200,000 killed. The Battle of Stalingrad, over 1 million casualties. The numbers were consistent across multiple human sources, but then he began finding references to other conflicts, other wars that Park Min-ho had mentioned only briefly. His bioluminescent patches began their nervous flickering. Again as he read, the Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan and his successors had killed an estimated 40 million people in the 13th and 14th centuries. 40 million, using nothing more advanced than horses, bows, and swords. The empire had stretched from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean, the largest contiguous land empire in galactic history. Vextal read tactical analyses of Mongol warfare and felt his exoskeleton grow cold. These ancient humans had developed psychological warfare to an art form. They would completely destroy cities that resisted, leaving no survivors, then spread word of the massacre to terrorize other settlements into surrender. They had weaponized fear itself, but the Mongols were just the beginning. Vextal discovered the Napoleonic Wars, where humans had fought for over a decade across multiple continents. The casualty estimates range from 3 to 7 million dead. and the wars had fundamentally changed how humans organized their societies and governments. He read about something called the American Civil War, where humans in a single nation had torn themselves apart over the question of slavery. Over 600,000 dead in 4 years, and the conflict had introduced mass-produced weapons, rapid communication via telegraph, and industrial-scale logistics. Entire economies had been mobilized to support armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Then he found the Chinese Warring States period and had to stop reading for several minutes to compose himself. For over 200 years, Chinese kingdoms had fought continuously for supremacy. The wars had involved millions of soldiers and had fundamentally shaped Chinese civilization. Some battles had involved over 500,000 troops on a single field. Commander Vextal, he turned to find a human female approaching his terminal. She was young, with short black hair and wearing the simple robes of an academic. Her identification badge marked her as Li Hyena, listed as a xenohistorian studying comparative military development. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," she continued in accented standard. "I noticed you've been researching human military history for several hours. I'm Li Hyena. I study how different species approach warfare. Perhaps I could help answer questions." Vextal's first instinct was to dismiss the young academic, but his traditional military arrogance had been badly shaken by the day's revelations. "You study warfare across species?" "Yes, it's my specialty. I'm particularly interested in how environmental and social factors influence military development. Your people, the Krillians, have a fascinating approach to combined arms tactics." Despite himself, Vextal felt a flicker of pride. "You have studied Krillian military doctrine?" "Of course. Your victory at the Siege of Vorth Prime is considered a masterpiece of siege warfare. The way you coordinated orbital bombardment with ground assault while maintaining supply lines across 3 star systems was brilliant." The compliment should have pleased him, but instead it only highlighted how small even his greatest victories seemed compared to human conflicts. "I have been reading about human wars," he said carefully. "The scale seems unprecedented." Li Hyena nodded seriously. "Human warfare is unusual in several ways. Would you like me to explain some of the patterns we've identified?" "Please." She activated a secondary display screen and began bringing up charts and historical timelines. Most species that achieve interstellar travel do so after unifying politically. They fight their major wars early in their development. Establish dominant governments, then focus on expansion. Humans are different. How so? We never unified completely before reaching space. We're still politically fragmented, but we learned to cooperate when necessary while maintaining our divisions. This created a unique military culture. She highlighted several conflicts on the timeline. "Look at this pattern. Humans fight major wars approximately every 20 to 30 years, with smaller conflicts ongoing continuously. Each war drives technological innovation, which then spreads to civilian applications, which accelerates overall development." Vextal studied the timeline. The pattern was clear once she pointed it out. "Your species uses warfare to advance technology?" "Not intentionally, but effectively, yes. Military necessity pushes us to solve problems quickly. Radar was developed to detect enemy aircraft. GPS was created for missile guidance. The internet began as a military communication system. Nuclear power came from nuclear weapons research. And this has been consistent throughout your history? Remarkably so. The ancient Chinese developed gunpowder for warfare, which led to mining explosives and eventually fireworks. Medieval European armor development drove metallurgy advances. The American Civil War accelerated industrial production techniques that revolutionized manufacturing. Li Hyena brought up another display showing human population growth over time. Here's something else unusual about human warfare. Our conflicts generally don't reduce our overall population growth. We recover from even massive wars within a generation or two. Vextal examined the graph with growing alarm. Despite the constant warfare, despite the millions of dead in countless conflicts, the human population curve showed relentless upward growth. War didn't weaken them, it seemed to make them stronger. How is this possible? High birth rates, rapid technological development, and social adaptation, Li Hyena explained. Humans are remarkably resilient. We can sustain enormous losses and rebuild quickly. Some theories suggest that constant conflict has actually selected for these traits over thousands of years. She pulled up images from various human conflicts. Look at these photographs from World War II. This is London after months of bombing. This is Warsaw after the uprising. This is Hiroshima after the atomic bomb. Each image showed devastating destruction. Now look at these same cities today. The modern images showed thriving metropolises, gleaming towers, bustling populations. The destruction had been completely erased, replaced by cities larger and more advanced than the originals. 70 years, Lee Hyena said quietly. In 70 years, we rebuilt everything and expanded beyond Earth to the stars. War doesn't stop humans, Commander. It teaches us. Vextal sat back in his chair, his mind struggling to process the implications. Your species has been fighting continuously for thousands of years, and each conflict makes you stronger. That's a simplistic way to put it, but not entirely wrong. We prefer peace, but we've learned to use conflict as a catalyst for growth. Most species see war as destructive. Humans see it as educational. What have you learned? Lee Hyena's expression grew serious. That survival requires constant adaptation. That technology can solve almost any problem if you're desperate enough. That ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when their survival is threatened. And most importantly, that there are things worth fighting for even if fighting means dying. She gestured at the historical timeline. Every major human advance has come from someone willing to risk everything for an idea. Democracy, human rights, scientific method, space exploration. All of these concepts were defended in warfare at some point. Vextal looked at the data flowing across the screens and felt something he had never experienced before. Fear of a species that wasn't currently threatening him. These humans weren't enemies, but their very nature suggested they could become the most dangerous enemies imaginable. Commander, Lee Hyena said gently, I hope this information helps you understand humans better. We're not a warlike species by choice. We're a species that has learned to use warfare as a tool for survival and growth. There's a difference. But as Vextal gathered his data and prepared to return to his quarters, he wasn't sure the difference mattered. 2 days had passed since Vextal's first meeting with Kim Ji-won, but it felt like a lifetime. The Krillian commander stood in the observation deck of Harmony Point Station, staring out at the stars through the massive transparent aluminum windows. The same stars that had once seemed like territories waiting to be conquered now looked different to him, like the domain of a species he barely understood. His diplomatic mission was complete. Trade agreements had been signed, territorial boundaries established, communication protocols agreed upon. All the standard procedures for first contact with the new spacefaring species had been followed. But Vextal felt anything but ready to return to his homeworld. Behind him, he heard soft footsteps on the deck plating. He turned to see Kim Ji-won approaching, carrying 2 cups of what appeared to be some sort of heated beverage. I brought you tea, she said, offering him one of the cups. It's a Korean blend called nocha. I thought you might enjoy it. Vextal accepted the cup carefully, his clawed hands dwarfing the delicate ceramic. The liquid was warm and had a pleasant, earthy smell that somehow reminded him of home. Thank you. You did not need to find me here. I wanted to make sure you were all right, Kim Ji-won said, moving to stand beside him at the window. You seemed troubled. After your conversations with Park Min-ho and Choi Dae-ho. The Krillian commander looked down at the small human female standing beside him. 3 days ago, he would have seen her as a soft, harmless creature barely worth his attention. Now he saw something far more complex and dangerous. I am trying to understand what your species represents, he said carefully. In my military career, I have always been able to categorize potential enemies and allies based on their capabilities and motivations. Your people do not fit any category, I understand. Kim Ji-won sipped her tea thoughtfully. How do you usually categorize species? There are predators who fight for dominance, prey species who fight for survival, and resource competitors who fight for territory or materials. Each type has predictable behaviors and limitations. And humans? Humans appear to be all 3 simultaneously, while also being something else entirely. Vextal's bioluminescent patches flickered slowly as he organized his thoughts. You fight like predators when threatened, but also like prey when defending abstract concepts. You compete for resources, but also give those resources away for principles. He turned to look at her directly. What disturbs me most is that everything I have learned about human warfare came from conflicts between humans. You have never actually faced an external existential threat. Kim Ji-won nodded slowly. That's true. Every major war in our history has been internal to our species. Civil wars, ideological conflicts, territorial disputes between human nations, which means your species developed its capacity for total warfare, for sacrifice, for technological innovation under pressure, all while fighting opponents who shared your basic psychology and limitations. Yes. What happens when you encounter species that do not share those limitations? Species that might threaten human existence or human values in ways other humans never could. Kim Ji-won was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the stars. I honestly don't know, Commander. It's a question our philosophers and military planners debate frequently. We hope we never have to find out, but if you did, then I suspect the galaxy would discover what humans are truly capable of when we're united against an external threat instead of divided against each other. The simple statement sent another chill through Vextal's exoskeleton. He thought about the numbers he had learned. 2.3 billion humans on their homeworld, with colonies spreading across multiple star systems. A species that had never been fully unified, but that showed unprecedented cooperation when facing common threats. Your trade representatives mentioned that Earth has nearly 200 separate governments, Vextal said. That's correct. We have nation-states, city-states, federations, republics, monarchies, and other forms of government. We've never achieved true planetary unification. What would it take to unify your species? Kim Ji-won considered this carefully. Historically, external pressure. When faced with threats that endanger human survival or human values, we put aside our differences remarkably quickly. The more existential the threat, the more unified we become. And if that unification were complete, if all human factions worked together toward a single military objective. Commander, that's not a scenario I like to contemplate. United humanity would be capable of things that divided humanity has never attempted. Vextal thought about the wars he had studied. World War II with 70 million dead. But that was only some human nations fighting some other human nations. The Mongol conquest that killed 40 million people. But the Mongols were a small fraction of the human population fighting other small fractions. What would happen if all humans worked together? If their capacity for innovation, their willingness to sacrifice, their talent for total warfare were directed outward instead of inward? There is something else, Vextal said quietly. In all my research, I found references to human conflicts I have not yet studied. Something called the Cold War. Kim Ji-won's expression grew troubled. That's a complicated topic, Commander. It was described as a conflict lasting over 40 years, but with very few direct casualties. How is this possible? The Cold War was fought between the United States and Soviet Union using proxy conflicts, espionage, economic warfare, and the threat of nuclear annihilation. Both sides developed weapons capable of destroying human civilization, but were too afraid to use them. Too afraid? By the end of the Cold War, both sides possessed enough nuclear weapons to end life on Earth several times over. We call it mutually assured destruction. If either side attacked, both civilizations would be completely destroyed. Vextal's compound eyes widened. Your species developed the capacity to destroy your own world? Multiple times over. At peak, human nuclear arsenals contained over 70,000 warheads. We could have sterilized every continent on Earth. And you chose not to use them? The consequences were too terrible to contemplate. So instead, we fought the Cold War through smaller conflicts, technological competition, and psychological pressure. We even competed to see who could reach space first. Vextal felt his mind reeling. These humans had developed planet-killing weapons, decided they were too dangerous to use, then channeled their competitive instincts into space exploration instead. Even their restraint demonstrated their terrifying potential. Commander, Kim Ji-won said gently, I can see that learning about human history has been disturbing for you. I want you to understand that we prefer peaceful solutions to problems. We're here in the galaxy seeking friendship and cooperation, not conflict. But if conflict became necessary, then any species threatening humanity would face something the galaxy has never seen. Humans united in common cause, fighting for survival instead of against each other. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the stars and sipping their tea. Finally, Vextal spoke again. When I return to my homeworld, I will recommend that the Krillian Empire establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity. Close relations. I'm pleased to hear that. You misunderstand my meaning, Vextal said seriously. I am recommending close relations because I believe it would be safer to have humans as allies than to risk them becoming enemies. Kim Ji-won looked at him with surprise. Commander, humans have no hostile intentions toward the Krillian Empire. I know. But intentions can change. Circumstances can change. If humans ever perceived my people as a threat to human survival or human values, he trailed off, unable to finish the thought. We would prefer to resolve such conflicts through diplomacy. Yes, but if diplomacy failed, you would resolve them through warfare. Total warfare if necessary. Kim Ji-won could not deny this. Yes, we would. Vextal drained his cup and set it aside. Then I will recommend that my people do everything possible to ensure that diplomacy never fails. As he prepared to leave the observation deck, Kim Ji-won called after him. Commander, I hope you don't think badly of humans because of what you've learned. We're not monsters. We're just a species that has learned to fight when fighting becomes necessary. Vextal paused in the doorway and looked back at her. I do not think badly of your species, Kim Ji-won. But I will never again make the mistake of underestimating what humans are capable of when you believe your survival is at stake. The next day, as his ship departed Harmony Point Station, Vextal recorded a classified message for Krillian High Command. First contact with human species successful. Trade agreements established. Recommend immediate full diplomatic engagement and cultural exchange programs. Under no circumstances should any Krillian force initiate hostilities with this species. Humans appear physically weak and technologically inferior, but possess unique capacity for total warfare exceeding anything in galactic history. They have never been truly united or faced external existential threat. Any conflict with humanity should be assumed to have potential for complete Krillian defeat. Species assessment. Approach with respect and caution. They are not like us. They are not like anyone we have encountered. Recommend permanent peaceful relations regardless of other strategic considerations.